very much. Here's the question from someone who agrees fundamentally with everything that has just been said. Why, given the fact that Vladimir Putin is ruining Russia and creating a new Russian tragedy, do so many of us perceive, and with some degree of reason, that Russia is winning? Why has Putin's Russia been so successful at unbalancing the West, presenting it with new surprises? Why is it that so many in the West are prolonging the life of this system? There is too much argument wasted on the question whether Putin is a master tactician or a master strategist. Perhaps he is neither. But he has one advantage compared to most Western governments. Anything Russia does today, everything it has been doing, has been done purposefully. Whether we're talking about Syria or Ukraine, Russian policy has been pursued purposefully, consistently, in a tough and usually devious manner, by people who understand, who have mastered the art, not of playing chess, but playing on several chessboards at once. This is part of it, and also the fact that this country that has limited power and knows it, has a system which, to the detriment of Russia, has securitized all of this so that Russia's limited power today is used to the full. A second aspect, I've just finished writing my third paper and several months about it. We talk about Russia InfoWar. Fine, I understand its importance, but remember, please, something that was said by an old friend of mine who defected from the KGB in 1979. He was Zamresidenta in Tokyo. He said the following: look for your vulnerabilities, and there you will find the KGB. The real issue is us. The real issue is what is wrong with us. And let me try with 1 to 2 minutes on each point, just underscore several points, some of which have been made already. Why does the West not thinking seriously and positively enough about Ukraine's future in the EU? It is because today the question before us in the EU is whether the EU will continue to exist. Please do not underestimate the problems, the elemental nature of the problems we are dealing with now, which we did not expect to be dealing with. Second point, who today in the West understands Russia and how well? In 1992, my center of experts on the Soviet Union and Russia and what became the newly independent states, our small center in the Ministry of Defense was told we shouldn't exist because there were now new problems, and we had to fight very hard to preserve our existence with diminished budgets, diminished numbers. This picture was repeated throughout the Western world. There has been a near obliteration, not just of people who speak the Russian language, this is not the key thing, but people who understand the thinking, the metabolism, and the methods of this system which Putin has perfected. A system which has synthesized and modernized traditions of Russian diplomacy and irregular warfare going back to the 16th century. During the Cold War, there were over 100 incidents, provocations, on the inner German border, and NATO knew what that meant. It was a test. In each case, NATO would respond proportionately. Who understands that now when Russian aircraft violate Turkish airspace? Or when ceasefires are broken in Donbass? Very few people, and the risk as a result is that the Kremlin will think at a critical moment that we are actually weaker and less resolved to do what we must do than we actually are. And my third point, which will be my last set of points, David. please give, if you can, I know, and I'm speaking very personally, think for a moment about the opponents the three of us have on this panel in the West, who we have to speak to, convince, or answer. And there are really two kinds. One set of these people call themselves realists. I call myself a realist, but today realism means something else. Realism in the West has become a dignified word for appeasement. The realists we are talking about are people who believe that international order is produced by great powers, and in the words of a former French president, small powers should learn how to be quiet. It is also the domain of people who are frankly defeatists. In 2014, experts I would speak to and dine with in Washington and London would say, James, you have to admit, in Donbass, Russia holds all the cards. If we listened to that advice then, there would have been no EU sanctions today. The situation in Ukraine would have been in turmoil. We would have had the third Maidan by now, and NATO would be deeply divided and also in turmoil, and the EU's condition would be far worse. So if I have any good news, it's that although Andrew Wood and I are not running policy, these people are not running policy either, but we have to struggle against this every day. And my very last point, if I may. When you mention Ukraine in the West today, the first thing that comes into people's minds before they speak is corruption. And the question that is raised is this: why should we keep throwing good money after bad? Why, after 20 years of promises and 2 revolutions, is the same system still more or less in place, the same corruption, the same insincerity, the same lies told? Why are we doing this? Well, first of all, please, this is a fundamental confusion. The principles of the UN Charter, of the Helsinki Final Act, of the Paris Charter, of the Budapest Memorandum, the principles of sovereignty, national independence, freedom of choice, were never confined just to countries that meet Euro-Atlantic standards of governance. They're confined to Ukraine, whether it meets those standards. They apply to Ukraine whether it meets those standards or not. But you could see there is a real political problem here, and we cannot solve it. Only you can solve it. I know perfectly well, and some of you won't like me to hear it saying this, it's undiplomatic, that if I look at Yatsenyuk's government, I would say there were 2 strong themes in it. One was serious structural reform. The second was corruption. The only thing the West notices is corruption. Ukraine has to change that, and my last comment, and I do not have time to elaborate it. We talk about Russian info war. Ukraine has no proper information strategy at all. The only people in Ukraine who understand it are people who came from the Maidan. The people who produce UA today understand it, and Ukraine today has lost all its money. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs doesn't understand it. Although Foreign Minister Klimkin is a very accomplished professional spokesman of Ukraine's real national interests, although he has had some outstanding predecessors, although there are some outstanding Ukrainian diplomats in this room. In all the time I have worked here, there has never been a proper reform of the MID, of the Ukrainian MFA, and you need to have one in the national interests of the country. So on that charming note, I will end, David. Thank you very much.
James, charming note. Thank you very much indeed.